I am Anna Seewald, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about personal development in the context of parenting, where I explore how you can find more calm, connection, and joy in parenting through the process of self-discovery and inner growth with a trauma-informed lens. I'm a parent educator, and my mission is to help children by helping parents. The motto of this podcast is raising our children, growing ourselves. Today, mother hunger, how adult daughters can understand and heal from lost nurturance, protection, and guidance. I am using the title of my guest's book to name this episode. It's a really powerful expression, and without a doubt, it will help you determine whether this conversation is for you or not, whether it's applicable to you or even palatable for you at this particular juncture of your life. When I first heard the title of this book, I knew in an instant what it was about, and I also knew that I wanted to talk to the author on the podcast. So my special guest today is Kelly McDaniel. She's an author, clinician supporting women on the journey toward relational wholeness. Kelly's first book, Ready to Heal, addresses cultural double standards and family wounds that set women up for addictive relationship habits. Her second book, Mother Hunger, is the culmination of 30 years of research, clinical expertise, and a deep understanding of mothering myths. Mother Hunger provides women a name for the misunderstood root of poor eating patterns, chronic relationship disappointment, and distorted self-image. In Mother Hunger, what Kelly does is validate the experience of mother loss by giving a poignant name to a phenomenon that many will know very well and offers an elegant and useful framework for healing. I found her framework extremely useful in understanding myself, and it expanded my knowledge of relational trauma. Her book, my conversation with her have changed me, and it will influence how I work. I have recommended this book already to so many people. Whether a woman loses her mother by death, as I did, or by abandonment in many forms, the experience will be one that a woman will reckon with for her entire life. Mother loss comes in many forms: cancer, illness, suicide, murder, accidents. And while many women still have their mothers, they have lost them to abandonment, addiction, memory malfunction, mental illness, and more. In short, this is a conversation about childhood attachment injuries and their lasting impact. Kelly destigmatizes the shame that comes with being under-mothered and offers a healing path with powerful tools that include lifestyle changes and therapeutic interventions. We all long for our mothers. There is no shame in that. I found this heartfelt conversation with Kelly on this sensitive, nuanced, at times not so comfortable but important topic tremendously helpful, and I hope you do too. Kelly says that the constant search for mother love can be a lifelong emotional burden, but healing begins with knowing and naming what we're missing. Please enjoy. Nice to finally connect. I am delighted to see you and have you on the podcast. I was dying to speak with you since the time that Claire Bidwell-Smith connected us, actually. I'm like, how did we connect? Who connected us? So that's how we connected. And I remember in your email, when we first connected, you said, I write about this topic, but are you able to talk about it or something of this nature. I'm like, wait, what? This is the first time that somebody says something. This is serious. And after reading your book, of course, I know what you mean. It's a difficult topic to talk about, to digest, to read about. It could be triggering for many people. And you're very brave to write about this topic in such open and lucid form.
Thank you so much for that validation. I think you're right. And it's only occurring to me really since its publication, just how much courage that took. I almost stopped writing it 2 or 3 times because I was so concerned that it would backfire and cause mothers more pain, cause women more pain, that as women, we're already enduring. So I'm so grateful that that has not been the case, that people are finding the book, although yes, difficult and yes, triggering, shame reducing and eye opening. And no one is using it yet to make things more difficult for mothers.
Yeah, that's not the tone of the book. That's not the voice at all. You are very clear. Every word is so measured, but it's so poignant. There is no extra fluffy stuff in there. It's sharp, it's to the point, it speaks to the heart, and it's so well written in that way. It speaks about something that is so hard to talk about. It's very ambiguous, amorphous, this topic, but you somehow brought it into sharp focus. And I love that you divide it into 3 elements. And that's, I think, the brilliance of your work, in my opinion. But before, I would love for you to say, what is mother hunger? When I first heard that word, I'm like, whoa, it's viscerally, you can sense what that is. And
I agree. I think if you have it, you feel it the minute you hear the word. It's always interesting to me when people hear the title, they're like, what's that? And I think if you have to ask me, you don't need to read the book. People that have it, instantly there's this recognition that the body goes through. The body feels suddenly seen and understood just by the correct name. And I always like to tell people that even now that you have a name, the healing is already unfolding, because our body waits until there's a logical reason for what the pain is, or the sadness, or the heartbreak. And we haven't had it. Like you said, I love your word amorphous. The concept of what a mother does is not anything that we all recognize together collectively. It's as if a mother is supposed to know what to do just because she has female anatomy. And the hardest part for writing this book for me was, although I had been treating mother hunger since 2008 when I first used that word, deciding to write this book, I had to operationalize what is a mother doing based on what I was seeing my clients were living without. And it took me a long time to figure that out. They were coming to me, adult women, missing certain elements of love and looking for it in all the wrong places. And every time I would be in the thick of an insightful moment underneath relationship pain, underneath food problems, what I would hear from a woman every time was, I want my mom. And this is when it occurred to me, this is a love that is a maternal love that we are craving. This is not romantic love. This is not just the love we get from our friends, although those things are wonderful. This is maternal love. And so I witnessed it in order to be able to write about it.
Wow, I so agree. And I think your courage, your braveness is, I find, is in normalizing that we need our mothers and not be ashamed for it. I think that the fact that you so openly speak about it speaks to all of us, because everybody has a mother.
We all have a mother.
We all come from a mother, right?
Yes, we do.
And wanting your mom is a powerful thing, but it's so unacknowledged.
It's
And it's
so
so shameful
unacknowledged.
to talk about it even. And it's hush hush. It's so terrible. I love that you gave voice to this. It's its own topic. It's there.
You have such beautiful words for why I wrote this book, and thank you. I keep saying yes, yes, and I don't even need to add anything. But I think it's really sad that living in the cultural soup that we do, we're all swallowing this toxic water that tells us we don't need each other. We need to be independent. We have to compete to get ahead. And it has so damaged our whole concept of valid human needs. Not only do we need our mother, just like every animal needs their mother. I mean, we see what happens, right? If we fostered an animal that was prematurely separated from their biological mother, sometimes they may be fed, they may be sheltered, but they're never quite right. And why do we think we're so different? We're not. In those first early months, days, hours, years, we are the most vulnerable of all mammals, and we need our mother desperately.
I was talking to another mom at the birthday party just the other day. She has a teenage daughter. I have a teenage daughter, and we were sharing experiences. And what surprised me and shocked me, when people hear, oh, you have a teenage daughter, I was even once responded by, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm like, why are you sorry? I love my daughter. I have an amazing relationship with my daughter. And because the cultural theme is, oh, teenagers are bad and they don't have a good relationship with their parents, I was almost sheepish not to talk openly about my wonderful relationship with my daughter. But why should I be so ashamed of having an amazing relationship, being an amazing mom, and having a great daughter? Yes, it's not like perfect, but I'm talking to this woman and she asks me, oh, you have a teenager, this kind of attitude. And I'm like, no, actually, I love being a mom to a teenager. I lost my mom when I was my daughter's age. And this is a healing experience and I love it. And I didn't say that to her, but I said, no, I love my relationship. It's amazing. I don't have a hard time. And in fact, after toddler years, this is my second favorite age of parenting, discovering who she is, seeing her grow, and it's amazing. And then she says something about her parenting, right? I'm not judging her. She's sharing. She's like, oh, I'm very strict with my teenage daughter. I give her money and she has a card. When she's late to school or when she misbehaves, I withdraw from her account the amount of she values her time. Her mother put a number on her time. And she says, I take from her account X amount every time. Yeah, she's going to learn. And then she gives me this tough love attitude. And obviously I can't relate. I'm not endorsing it. I'm like, wow, why is it has to be this way, this rupture? Why is it has to happen in our culture, right? Because it's portrayed everywhere and people subscribe to this. We can challenge that. You can have a great relationship with your daughter. Why not? Why can't you see that as a possibility?
This is why I wrote the book. We need a paradigm shift, a major global paradigm shift. And the truth is, the rupture that as parents we might experience with our teenagers began in the crib. If our infants are trained to go to sleep without our comfort, to eat on a schedule, they are learning before they have language, before they have cognition, to rely on themselves, not to rely on us. The trust is broken then. Our job to make them feel safe, to be available. That's what a mom does. If we don't do that because we're following mainstream guidance to let them cry it out or to put them in timeout, these horrible misguidance that we get from mainstream medicine and parenting experts is ruining the parental bond in infancy with the child. So by the time they're teenagers, They don't trust us. They don't respect us. And so a lot of teenagers might demonstrate some anger. They may look rebellious, may just shut out their mother or parent. That's because they already know how to do that. They know they have to rely on themselves. No one's going to come to their rescue. There's no nurturing there. There's very little protection. And the guidance has been unfortunate. So when parents are struggling with teenagers, it's not the teenager.
Yes. You write in the book that you looked for a definition of mothering and you couldn't find it. I'm wondering if you can say a few words about that. What was the dictionary definition of mothering?
Thank you. Yes, this was so eye-opening for me. I'd never really looked it up until I decided to write this book. And when I went to various dictionaries, they all said the same thing: to care for someone as a mother would. It was so unhelpful and gave me so much compassion for every mother, because there's no definition. There's nothing universal that we learn about how to mother someone who's in our care and totally defenseless. So we learn it from our mother, and she learns it from her mother, who learns it from her mother. And so when we have ancestral trauma in our matrilineal line, which most of us do because women have been victims collectively, like men, of war and racism and classism, but women have also been sexual victims for generations. So most of us as women are carrying inordinate amounts of anxiety and fear in our bodies that gets transmitted down through the placenta in pregnancy, from grandmother to mother to daughter.
Yes, very well said. Why I have so many examples from my work come to me, but I'm not gonna go into there. I work with parents, and so like a homeless woman who gave birth on the streets to a child, and that child is taken away from her now, and she's fighting in court to be a mom. She's young, in her 20s. And when you dig into her own story, when she was 13, her mom threw her out and she was on the streets ever since. But today, of course, she didn't have this maternal love, guidance, or anything, nurturance. And she gave birth to a child who had drugs in her system on the streets from another homeless person. But she's trying very hard to be a mother. She doesn't have that template. Something is missing. And it's so painful to see that. No matter what, she's learning, she's trying, but it's so sad. The mother's role is so significant. It's so significant in who we become, how we live our life, how we mother, how we parent, how we do relationships. It's so fundamental.
It's everything.
It's everything.
It's also how we feel about ourselves, because it's through our mother's embrace, it's through her care, those early messages that are all embodied, that we learn whether or not we're lovable and whether or not we like being in our own body. And so in the situation that you're talking about, what's so tragic is, yes, this mother can go try to cognitively learn how to be a mother, but it will never be embodied because of her trauma history. So it's always going to take this immeasurable effort. And for people who had adequate mothering, there's no way they understand this because it's nonverbal. It's in our body. And I think that was what was so challenging about writing the book, is I couldn't find words out there to help me write the book. I had to make them, create them, find them, because we are all living, if we have mother hunger, and I include myself, we're living with an embodied sense of deprivation, but not a cognitive sense of it, unless she was, as in your case, perhaps she died early, so we have an understanding maybe of why we hurt. Or if she was overtly abusive, we may have an understanding of why we hurt. But for many situations, Mothers who are well-meaning and very loving, but following mainstream guidance, didn't nurture and protect their children in the way that the human mammal needs. So it's really mysterious to become an adult daughter and wonder, why do I not like myself? Why don't I like my body? Why don't my relationships work? Why am I scared all the time? Or why am I struggling to get off the couch? Why do I not have any dreams for my life? So these are the questions that live inside the body of an adult woman with mother hunger.
And it often, right, attachment forms in the first 3 years of life. And we don't have often memory, explicit memory of those things. Those feelings are inside us, in our cells. It's baked in us, right? That emptiness, that craving, that deprivation, shame. It's in you, but you don't know where they stem from.
Right. What we feel before we have words is that if we're not being cared for, it's because something's wrong with us. Now, that's not cognitive until we're 6 or 7 years old. But those first 5, 6 years, it's just an embodied sense of shame, of unlovability, which has nothing to do maybe with how we were loved. I mean, our mothers may have loved us, our caregivers may have loved us. But if we were not attuned to, responded to when we were scared or crying or hungry, we literally don't know that we're loved, no matter how much somebody says it.
And it's so, I mean, being a parent to a newborn is challenging and hard. Newborns are vulnerable. They don't talk, they cry. It's triggering for a lot of people. It's an emotional job. It's a stressful and draining job. Let's face it, it's not easy to be a new parent. You don't sleep, you don't eat, you know, your body goes through changes and your identity shifts, and now you have to take care of this human that you really wanted and you love, but you know, a lot can go amiss in that process. You know, it's not about good intentions or love or being a good mother. The job itself is very hard. And so that's why I want people to make a conscious choice if and when possible, because it's not always possible. You can't choose to become a parent, right? Sometimes it just, you know, you're a rape victim or, you know, there's certain circumstances. But if people can consciously make a choice, knowing, like if people could read your book before becoming a parent, I would encourage that, because not everybody is meant to become a mother. And it's not a harsh statement. It's so difficult, and you're passing down that trauma. It's worth considering that responsibility, what you're getting into.
It's hard for people to consider that responsibility when there's no information out there telling them what the job description is. And that's why I agree with you. Mother Hunger should be a book in every high school health class. But what I also want to say, to piggyback on what you're bringing up, which is so important, yes, becoming a new mother is overwhelming, but here is partly why. The new mother needs the same nurturing, protection, and guidance that her baby does. And we don't offer that. We're not nurturing the new mother adequately. We're not protecting the new mother adequately. And we give her terrible misguidance. That's what makes it hard. When we lived in communities, when we were parenting in a village of hunters and gatherers, the women were not isolated. When a woman was pregnant, she was pampered. When a woman was giving birth, she was surrounded by sisters, aunts, mothers, or elders. Everyone fed her. They cared for them both. They protected the infant. They protected the mother. To see this in action, we have to look at elephants. Watch a mother elephant give birth and look at what the other elephants do. They circle the baby. They circle the mother. They live in matriarchal societies, and they never leave their mother, ever. We are so far away from that that's what makes it overwhelming, not the actual essence of caring for a newborn, but mothers are not cared for.
Well said. Wow, very powerful. And I do remember it brings up a personal, when I was nursing my baby and I was a mother, all I wanted was someone to cook food for me.
Yes. Yes.
I remember vividly that.
Yes, because your body was making so many calories, burning so many calories to produce milk. You were doing your job. You needed to be fed. And if that nurturing had been there, if that nurturing had been warm and comforting and abundant for you, the act of feeding your baby, which is what we're designed for, would have been easier. So many women who tell me tragic stories of their milk drying up and not being able to, I keep wondering, well, who was feeding you? And if you're stressed, yeah, the body starts to shut down and won't make the milk. But doctors aren't telling women this.
No. No, it's such a tragic reality, seriously, when you think about this. So what I really love about your work, your brilliance, is you operationalize, I love that word too, mothering into these three key elements: nurturance, protection, and guidance. And boy, it makes sense when you put it in that little formula and you explain and the roadblocks and the healing that has to happen. It's so powerful. Our brain craves clarity and specificity.
Yes.
So
Yes.
speak about these three elements, give us an overview, and then we'll go a little in depth.
Okay. Okay. I called them the three essential elements of mothering because they are so essential. Nurturing and protection are as primitive. The need for these two things are as primitive as water and air and food. So I have a hard time, I don't put them in a hierarchy. So I'll talk about them first. Nurturing is what every infant needs in order to build a healthy brain. So that means feeding, holding, touching. It means attuning. It means being responded to. It means that an infant language, which is crying, is responded to so that the baby learns, if I have a need, the world is a safe place to be. If I'm frightened, I will be comforted. If I'm hungry, I will be fed. If I'm lonely, I will be tended to. Nurturing is so essential that when infants don't have it, we have brain scans that show what happens to infants who are neglected in horrible ways, which it doesn't take a horrible way to damage the brain, but the imagery we have comes from orphanages where we see that infants do not develop the natural neural pathways to bond with other humans. This is tragedy. And that's why I consider nurturing as primitive as protection. Protection's the next element. Obviously, if an infant is born and doesn't have shelter, warmth, and safety, they can die, which is why the human cry is so hard for us to hear. We're not supposed to like that sound. If a baby's crying in the wilderness when we're hunters and gatherers, what do you think could happen? It can attract a predator. It could attract another tribe that's trying to harm our tribe. Mothers kept their babies at the breast to keep them quiet so that they would stay safe, mothers and babies. We're not supposed to like that cry. It disturbs us for a reason. So think of what's happening to the new parent who has to let their baby cry in the crib because that's their terrible misguidance. It's horrible. It's abusive. And it makes me so sad, which is why I had to write this book. We have to shift this paradigm. The third element is guidance. And this is where I see mother hunger gets a little bit different for boys and girls. Boys, baby girls, they both need nurturing. They both need protection. But as they grow and enter adolescence, boys are going to look elsewhere for guidance, not necessarily from their mother, although they always want to admire her and be proud of her. Girls, on the other hand, don't need to shift their focus. In fact, they don't really want to. They want to admire their mother. They want to respect her. They want to look up to her. And some of the saddest forms of mother hunger can come from missing this piece. And I hear it in my office where a daughter's like, she almost can't say it without going into a terrible shame spiral, because what she says finally is, my mother always embarrassed me. I didn't want to be like her. So adult daughters feel a horrible sense of betraying their mother who they love, because they couldn't look to her for guidance for various reasons. But one of the biggest reasons, I think, is that their mother and their grandmother never got to develop their own life, their own dreams. So they have a hard time guiding their daughter. In more sinister scenarios, you have mothers who were not there when their daughters were little and now want to step in when they're teenagers and take charge, but their teenager is already like, are you kidding me? I've been doing this on my own. I don't need you. So there are various ways that we lose out on maternal guidance. And it can be, even if that's all you missed, if you're listening to this and you had a mother that was playful and nurturing and kept you safe, but as you developed, you realized, I can't really look to her to help me develop. That can be very painful. That is a form of mother hunger. It's not as serious as missing out on nurturing, missing out on protection, and missing out on guidance and having an abusive mother. So I wrote a whole separate chapter for those daughters called Third Degree Mother Hunger. And that is a type of mother hunger that needs clinical support.
Boy, I can say so many things. You know, when you said the brain scans of kids, that's where the roots of violence lies in that. If you're a human who doesn't have an ability to connect to other humans, see them as separate human beings, have compassion for them, let alone, or empathy, or for that matter, for yourself, because you don't know who you are. Of course, taking a gun and shooting everyone is so easy. Of course, pushing the nuclear button and creating a war in the world is so easy, because it's like, it's so shameful that everything begins with good mothering, with parenting. We, like I always say, we can create world peace by changing the way we parent, through parenting. I strongly believe in this.
Well, yes, because if a baby learns in the crib that no one is going to respond to me, empathy is going to shut down. Infants are born ready to be relational, but those neural pathways will atrophy, in essence, to survival. And so what happens is this brain that's supposed to be a mammal brain gets stuck in reptilian parts of the brain, lower parts of our brain that are purely about fight, flight, and freeze and survival. It's that basic. And so we lose empathy. That's a higher cortical functioning process. And when we can't experience it as little ones from our parents because they don't empathize with us due to their own trauma or misguidance, we start to really lose that skill. And it's tragic. And I just want to say at this point, I know we're referring to how essential a mother is, but I want to just say part of why I wanted to operationalize this is so we can look at the three elements. That's what's essential. Another caregiver can provide those. Another caregiver can nurture, can protect, and can guide in the event that the biological mother is not there. So it's about, we need those mothering elements. It's not just that we need her. We are born ready to love her. We already know her smell. We know her sound. We've been by her heartbeat. So if we lose her at birth due to adoption, surrogacy, death, what we're going to need from the step-in caregiver is an awareness that we're already feeling loss. That baby may already cry more, may already feel a sense of rejection that is going to be embodied from the maternal loss, but it is not a recipe for mother hunger, because a well-tuned in caregiver can provide those three needs, and mother hunger does not have to develop, which is another reason I want everyone to have this book, because we have so many creative ways now that we're creating families that do take the infant from the biological first home.
I completely agree with what you're saying, and thanks for bringing that up, because the last thing I want people to think is badly about themselves as mothers. And I did receive all those elements, not from my mother, but from other women in my life. You know, my grandparents, my grandmothers, my aunts, and so it's totally, it makes a big difference. Another thing I would like to plug in Bruce Perry's book when we spoke about violence and nurturing, The Boy Who Was Raised Like a Dog, a phenomenal read, more written for clinicians, but I think it's such a powerful book with storytelling, not an academic book.
I found Bruce Perry's work and Dr. Gabor Mate's book just both fundamental to what I was trying to write. Gabor talks about adoptees carrying a lifelong sense of rejection in their body. And it was just so validating and helpful to have his pioneering work and Bruce Perry's pioneering work.
And when I was reading, even though you indicate in the book clearly, you give, then this is the first time I'm saying I read a book where the author gives an instruction how to read the book. You say, read this book as a daughter, not a mother, which is very hard to do. I have to say, because your own mothering challenges and mistakes surface, you question yourself. But what else showed up for me when I was reading your book, especially the part about deprivation, early maternal loss, my father, when he was 9 months old, 9 months, he lost his mother. She died. Yes, he grew up with a stepmom who loved and nurtured and all of that. But I know for sure he had something missing all his life.
Yes.
That rejection.
Heartbreak.
It's so heartbreaking to know that. As an infant, he was baked in it.
That's right. I love that you use the word baked in it.
No matter what happened to him later, it was still there. It was still there. And I know it. And it's so heartbreaking. I lost my dad too. And I wish I could ask him questions. But he had a tattoo when he was a teenager. He rebelled and he went to get a tattoo, which was not fully completed. And he always had that tattoo on his hand. And it said, it's supposed to be a phrase that says, I will never forget you, Mom, for his biological mom. But they caught him as a teenager. His dad caught him getting the tattoo. And it's halfway written, that sentence. And it just breaks my heart to even talk about this.
Oh, yes.
And as a boy, he was loved, he was cared, he had siblings from this other mother. But obviously there was something always in him yearning for his mother.
That's mother hunger. It is as biological as the need to eat food, which is why I call it mother hunger, because this is wired into us. It's not a choice. It's not a decision. It's a hunger. It's a biological craving. And if it's not fed, we are brokenhearted across the lifespan. And that story, thank you so much for sharing it, because it shows how enduring that heartache is. And as he was trying to even really find some intervention that would soothe himself, the tattoo, some way to
soothe a teenage boy.
Yes, of course. When he finally had enough probably agency to get out and go do something to help himself, it got intervened. That's heartbreaking.
Because probably he had questions, right?
Of course he did.
Like, who am I? Where is, why? What happened? Where is my mom? It's so sad. It's so sad. There was something in the book about guidance that I see happening in our culture, how mothers become very, very friendly with their daughters. I really want you to talk about this, because I see this a lot. What does it indicate? What's going on? And how is it going to impact the daughter one day?
Well, I'm glad you brought this up, because I deliberately did not put case studies in the Mother Hunger book, because I have so many stories that are so heartbreaking. I was afraid if I started to put some of those in the book, it would be just too painful for the layperson to read. So what I did instead is I used Hollywood movies to illustrate a point, or memoir. There's a beautiful memoir called Wild Game that I used as an illustration of what happens when a mother takes her daughter as her confidant and best friend, which is basically a role reversal. And in this story, as in many stories, when a mother has a secret, when a mother, in this case, has an affair and decides to tell her teenage daughter, the daughter is going to go through two things. One, oh, my mom is choosing me, and it feels so good that she's confiding in me and she loves me. And in that moment where mom is coming to you as the daughter, you feel so special. So it's really hard to identify that this is abusive, right? Because it feels like a privilege. But then what happens is the daughter becomes the mother. The daughter misses out on guidance as she really comes alongside her mom and has to grow up in order to handle this kind of confidence, this kind of adult information, because the mother didn't develop enough to have her own friends or have her own therapist. And then Hollywood loves this. It's why the Gilmore Girls was such a popular show. I mean, it just, I couldn't even watch it.
I have not watched it, but sorry to interject. There is apparently another movie, my neighbor told me, called Ginny and Georgia.
Ginny and Georgia and Jillian. Yeah, same thing.
Same thing, right? My neighbor says you should watch this so you can talk to the parents that you work with. I'm like, from the sound of it, this is so awful.
It's really difficult to watch, and it is a great example of the Gilmore Girls on steroids, which is kind of like everything in our culture. I think when we were younger, we were worried about our kids and what they might see that would teach them about sexuality before we were ready to teach them. Well, now our kids are all learning from pornography. So on steroids, they're getting misinformation. And I think that's how Ginny and Georgia is in relation to Gilmore Girls. It's just on steroids.
It's awful. It's just awful. But that book that you quote, I'm going to read that book, Wild Game.
It's wonderfully written. The author is fabulous. And it's a beautiful story of her own coming of age and her own innocence getting stolen by her mother.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. I work with parents and I, talk to a lot of parents. I see that a lot of women are trying to be their children's friends. And I have discussions with my own daughter about this. I don't want to be too specific.
That's okay. And I want to just kind of help you here by saying.
But there is a really good example I want to give. But
I think so many mothers grew up deprived of their own mother's affection, their own mother's kindness. And so the desire to be their daughter's friend, I think, comes from love. I think it comes from a wish to have something different than what they had with their own mothers. So I don't think it has to necessarily be as drastic as it was in Wild Game or in Ginny and Georgia. But again, this is where we are giving a lack of guidance culturally by not understanding the power that a mother has. And if she misuses that power because she's just unaware, it doesn't change what it feels like to her daughter.
And then we perpetuate the same pattern, right? That then the daughter is one day going to become a mother with this enmeshment, boundarylessness.
Or she'll go the other direction. Usually it skips a generation. So what I've seen happen is that if a daughter had to be her mother's best friend, what she'll do with her daughter is the exact opposite, because it felt so gross, right? She didn't want to be in that role. So what she'll do with her daughter is disengage, lots of boundaries, lack of affection. And then that daughter grows up deprived, wants her mother, and then it goes enmeshment to the next cycle. So it usually skips a generation.
That's so powerful. This is such a hard topic. So true, powerful.
That's why we can all collectively take a breath.
Yeah. And you can say that it's a spectrum, obviously. You might have received nurturance, but not protection. And you might have received guidance, but not nurturance. And it's a spectrum, to what degree, to what extent. And healing also is sort of not straightforward for everyone. There's no prescription, but it's possible.
Well, I think the book comes close to a prescription, and here's why. This is why it was so important for me to operationalize what a mother does. I didn't write a parenting book. I really did not write this to teach mothers what to do. I wrote this so an adult daughter no matter what age she is, and I've worked with most women in their 50s, 60s, and 70s that are just now realizing that they want their mom. They needed to know what exactly it is they were craving. Was it nurturing? Was it safety? Was it that they could admire her? It took me years to get my brain around this because I wasn't taught this in school. And that is why I wrote the book, so that it helps us as women to know what we lost so we can then reclaim it. We become our mother now. We're not going to get it from her. Well, rarely. Occasionally, I have seen some healing happen but I don't want to go into that because it sets daughters up for a fantasy. But I have seen women who have no mother on the planet be able to become their own mother now that they know what they wanted. They didn't know because there was no definition.
It was amorphous. Now they know that I needed protection, and you can take measures towards that. And or if you needed guidance, or if you needed nurturance, you can nurture yourself. Start nurturing yourself in ways that it totally makes sense. I love that part, that the three elements is brilliant. You also talked about shame, that because of this, in the case of nurturance, when you miss nurturance, what develops, a belief develops that I'm not lovable, which is shame. What all these three elements have in common is shame, is the common denominator. Can you speak about that? It's so eloquent.
Well, let's look at a situation of lack of protection. Let's say your own mom was not safe in her primary relationship with your father or stepfather or whatever her surroundings were. It could have been her own parents. It could have been that she was alone. For whatever reason, she was not protected, so she couldn't protect you. Well, as a child, we don't see that as our mother's shortcoming. We just know we're scared and we think it's something to do with us. So we twist ourselves psychologically, emotionally, physically to try to feel safe with her, because the implicit message in our body is, if I can just be okay, she'll love me and I'll be safe. That happens with lack of protection or lack of nurturing, because nature doesn't differentiate why the mother's not providing this. Nature just encodes into the child, this is not an optimum situation for you to develop. The child makes sense of that when the brain comes online more like age 6 or 7 as something's wrong with me, because we cannot see that something is wrong with our caregiving environment. It would be too threatening. We would feel too vulnerable. So our body, Mother Nature, protects us from knowing. It's a beautiful system, which is why so many of us get to an advanced age before we come into touch with mother hunger. Our body's been protecting us for decades.
Yeah, and then you connected to food disturbances, eating disorders, addictions, all sorts of ways. Whatever we missed, we try to receive it in indirect ways, right, in our life.
That's because we're resourceful little creatures. So we're going to find a way to soothe that longing, right? And usually the first thing we have access to is food, way before drugs and alcohol. The other thing we have access to that we don't even know we're doing is fantasy. We are, as little creatures, imagining the mother that we want, imagining the daddy that we want, imagining that we're okay, imagining that someone's going to rescue us. Throw in a few fairy tales, and you could see why we can grow up with amazing capacity to fantasize or imagine that there's someone out there to rescue us. And then when we fall in love, we're coming into that relationship with so many unmet needs that we're not aware of. We think this person's going to provide it. And when that doesn't happen, there's all kinds of consequences.
Amen. Well said. Oh my goodness. You also, well, and you call this surrogate comfort. just that term itself, again, it's pretty powerful. Dr. Judith Rabinor, whom I interviewed 5 times because I love her so much and her work. She is also an expert in mother-daughter relationship, and she's run groups for eating disorders for 30 years. I'll recommend a few episodes in the show notes for the listener. Fathers can provide care, nurturance, and protection. I was raised by a father. I want you to say just a couple of words in the closing about that it's not about bashing fathers or minimizing what we received from our fathers. Can you speak about to this a little bit?
Sure. Although you just said 2 really important things, and in one, you talked about eating disorders and surrogate comfort. So that's a whole topic. And then fathers is a whole separate topic. So to just kind of land where you last landed about dads, I want to just reiterate that what infants need and what teenagers need is nurturing, protection, and guidance. And if a father provides that, great. Mother hunger does not have to develop. However, for all of us, our mother is our first love. Like it or not, we fall in love in utero. So a father and his or her child, because now we have all kinds of ways of being a dad, if they have not carried that infant, there may be more effort required to imprint the necessary nurturing, protection, and guidance. But that's not the book I wrote, so I don't feel like I'm adequate to say much more about that.
No, that's enough. That's what I was hoping to get from you. Did you wanted to say something about surrogate comfort?
I would just really recommend that chapter for anyone who is struggling with food and body image. In fact, I recommend this chapter so strongly that I have put it on my Instagram account. You can either find me there and click on the link tree, or you can go directly to my website, and I have offered that chapter as a free gift. It is a powerful chapter to help women take away the shame of why we struggle with food, which was probably our very first replacement for mother love. So based on what our relationship was like with her, we may overindulge or we may restrict, but either way, when a woman tells me her story about food, I pay attention, because what I know she's telling me is her story of maternal love, which is going to be her story of how she loves herself. So I love this chapter. It's partly why I wrote the book, because all my clients were like, you've got to write about food. Because a lot of eating disorder material out there is more medically oriented or geared toward people who are at such ends of the extreme that they're not really touching the fact that many of us as adult women are struggling with food and with how to nourish ourselves in a way that would be loving, because we don't know what that feels like. And when we had to feed ourselves, we probably didn't do it in the most healthy way when we were little. We just wanted to fill the void. And it's such a powerfully effective way to numb the pain that it carries on for a lifetime. So you can get the Surrogate Comfort chapter for free on my website, or through my Instagram account, which will direct you to the website if you don't have the book.
Yeah, but it's a powerful book. I highly recommend it. In fact, I recommended it to my therapist today.
I'm so glad. This needs to be in every therapist's office, and it needs to be part of the curriculum in training.
Because I was in her waiting room right before our interview, and I saw a book entitled Mothering and Daughtering. One part of the book is written by a daughter about mothering, and the other part of the book, it's a 2-book in one. I didn't have a chance to read it. It seemed interesting, but I recommended this book to her since I saw that book in their waiting room. Maybe there is interest in there, And I don't have to say much. I can just say the title. It speaks for itself. Right?
Right. But even in doing that, you're helping me with this mission to shift a paradigm. It takes each of us, whether we read it ourselves and we heal, which is part of breaking the cycle. We share it with others who are in a position to share it with others. I want this to reach pediatricians, OBGYNs, coaches, health instructors, professors. Yeah, we've got a lot of work to do. So thank you for helping me.
And just to conclude, if you talk about attachment injury, insecure attachment, avoidant, attachment theory gets a lot of attention these days, right? Which is amazing, and it's the root of your work. But this is different. And I interviewed, I forgot her name, Janice Webb, childhood emotional neglect. She created that paradigm, childhood emotional neglect, Janice Webb. Similar, but she doesn't talk about specifically to mothers, daughters. I interviewed someone else called, her name was Sarah Payton, and she talks about alarmed aloneness.
I know Sarah.
You know
Yes.
Sarah?
Alarmed aloneness is the same as condemned isolation that I talk about in the Mother Hunger book, which is actually a term from the Stone Center at Wellesley that do all the research on women and connection.
Yeah, this all reminded me of those things. So, Kelly, in ending this conversation, is there anything I didn't ask that it's important that the listener take away from this conversation, or a message that you have, a quote that you want to share, anything? I don't want it to be incomplete from your part.
Well, I'll just say this. Your expert knowledge of the book, your wonderful awareness of yourself as a daughter and as a mother has made this a very comprehensive, compassionate, and thorough interview. So thank you. I really don't have anything to add, but I will finish up with my favorite quote that has informed my life. I think I first discovered Adrienne Rich's work and her book Of Woman Born when I was very young in grad school the first time. So I was probably 22. And in her book Of Woman Born, there's a quote from her that says, "The loss of the mother to the daughter and the daughter to the mother is the essential female tragedy." And I tell you what, this reverberated through my whole body on a lot of levels. But one was, I was reading a lot of Shakespeare because I was an English major, and Shakespeare's all about tragedy, but it was always fathers and sons. It was always this kind of, yes, I had never heard anyone put mothers and daughters on the forefront of development of the world. And Adrienne Rich did that, but it also hit me on a very personal level because that loss is inexplicable. So I think from that moment on, I've been on some kind of mission to explain that loss. I didn't know that, but it feels really good that we're having this conversation about mother hunger. And thank you.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. I am so changed by this conversation, I have to say. Thank you.
That means a lot. Thank you.